Also on your agenda tonight is a request for a resolution of support for the Powhite Parkway, and this is really related to our efforts to secure additional funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So these are the billions of dollars that the federal government is making available to localities, state governments to fund infrastructure. Our specific ask would be to fund the extension, or at least the design work related to the extension from where it will terminate around Woolridge Road all the way out to Hull Street. We ballpark that at around $15 million in terms of engineering and some property acquisition. This is really the first step in what will be likely be a very long process. When I've talked about this with Joe, we've related it really to how 288 was built, but also wanted to convey that there's a lot of history behind this. So these are scans of actual maps. Some of these were on vellum, if you remember what vellum is. Very old materials. You can see the yellowing of the paper, or the vellum in this case. For the one on the left was the county's adopted transportation plan back in 1977. So the year I was born, 45 mere years ago. But you could see that the Powhite Parkway actually back then terminated right in here. So there was no extension beyond what has been built to date. So then you could see in 1989, the Powhite was constructed to its current terminus, and then we added this long ring road around the county. So about 30 or so years ago, the extension was at least added there. Again, what we are talking about is really the extension kind of towards this area, so the western extension out to Hull Street. To compare this to Route 288, I think it's a good comparison. You can see on this particular timeline that 288 was first envisioned back in the mid-'60s. Several of the localities you could see there, Chesterfield, Henrico, and Goochland, looked at several different alignments. The original alignment was approved back in 1969, and I'll show you some subsequent slides where that was and talk a little bit why that was changed. But it was the revised alignment was approved through many community meetings in 1988. And you can see over this timeline that the balance of the road was then completed between 1988 and 2004. So a 16-year time period with multiple different sections using multiple different funding sources. So there were toll revenue bonds. There were actually county bonds that paid for certain sections. The section from Hull Street to Powhite was done as part of the Powhite project, but using county bonds that we loaned to VDOT. As some of you may know, VDOT is still currently paying us back for the interest on those bonds. The section from Route 1 to Route 10 was county financed as well. There were also conventional state and federal funds. For example, the section from Interstate 95 to Route 1 was done using state and federal funds. Also, and this is one that I had completely forgotten about. Some of you may remember that there were tolls on Interstate 95 back in the day. So in 1983, it was Senate Bill 304 through the General Assembly extended the life of the tolls on Interstate 95 to fund a handful of different projects, one of which was actually 288. So at the time, there was a large push from our locality and our delegation to not have tolls on 288. So one of the funding mechanisms they were able to use was the tolls on Interstate 95. Interestingly enough, we've discussed doing something similar in terms of there is an existing toll, as you all know, 75 cents on the Powhite Parkway. The primary debt on that is scheduled to be paid off somewhere around 2027 or 2028, we think, according to VDOT. But one of the things that we could look at doing is allowing that toll to remain, in part to finance, again, an extension of the Powhite Parkway, not entirely dissimilar from what was done on Interstate 95. Again, very similar to what was done with 288. That would require action from the General Assembly. So that would be something that we would need to discuss with our delegation to see whether or not there would be merit to doing that. To give you an idea of costs, so the section from 95 to Powhite was completed in 1990, and I'm using ballpark numbers, so there are different dates and other things, but ballpark 1990 at a cost back then of $143 million. If you adjust for inflation at 2% over those 30 years, that gets you to $270 million. The section from Powhite then to 64 was completed on or about 2002 at a cost, again, just construction cost of $325 million, which again, if you adjust for inflation, is about $480 million. So adding 270 and 480, the math in my head, $750 million. Interestingly enough, again, the number that we have touted for the extension out to Hull Street is in that $700 million range. So again, it's been done before. It takes a lot of heavy lifting. It takes a lot of concentration. It takes a lot of time. But it is something that has been done, and again, we can do again if we all push in the right direction. I promised you I'd talk a little bit about alignments and what we learned from 288 back in the day. So this dotted line that you could see on this map was the original approved alignment back in the 60s. I think it was 1968. What happened, throughout development of the county is there was a small neighborhood in Midlothian called Queensville. Not so small, actually, but it is located kind of somewhere, let's see if I can find it. It's somewhere in this area. Unfortunately, back when Queensville was developed, we did not reserve the right-of-way for the extension or the construction of Route 288 at the time. So when it came time to really look at building this, obviously people were opposed to going through large swaths of homes. So what was the rallying cry at the time was go west with 288. I've still got a button in my office that says go west 288. There were signs. Some of you that have been around a while may remember that discussion. So what happened is that the state at the time considered a whole host of different alignments in order to avoid impacts to residential properties. What ultimately got chosen was really more, again, of that westerly alignment. But it's why you don't see that 288 ties directly into 295. So if you've wondered why is there this wonky gap of I go to 288, then to 64, then I hang a right, then I tie into 295. 295 right here, you have to do this weird maneuver. That's why. So just a little bit of at least interesting to me road history of why things are the way they are. So what I wanted to convey to you out of that is we certainly learned from history. We have been reserving the right-of-way and the corridor for the Powhite Parkway since 1989. We have stuck with that same alignment. So I wanted to point out to you a few different locations. You can see right here. So these are preliminary plans for the Powhite Parkway extension. These are available on our website. We have these if anybody wants to really dive into them. But you can see all of the residential has been developed around it. So this is New Market at Roundtree is the subdivision here. We reserved a 200-foot corridor through the middle of that, along with a 200-foot, I believe it's a 200-foot setback on both sides. Have to go confirm the setback, but again, we have the right-of-way through here. You'll hear discussions about the Swift Creek Berry Farm, the blueberry farm that is right in this location. Again, this alignment was picked using aerial photography to in particular miss the existing structures that are on the site. The residential structures certainly could impact some of the farm there, but it was picked so that we would not be relocating residents as an example. As you continue moving towards Hull Street, again, you'll see that you may recognize some of these zoning cases. Piedmont Ventures has a condition requiring them to dedicate an alignment of the Powhite Parkway. The FC Richmond property right there on Genito, the soccer club that rezoned, again, requires them to dedicate right-of-way. And then through Magnolia Green itself, so kind of this section through here, there was an option through the zoning, which we did exercise to purchase the right-of-way through Magnolia Green. So we already own, I believe it's, and Brent can holler and correct me, I think it's about 70% of the right-of-way through there, and then we have others that are committed through the zoning through the zoning process itself. So again, large project, heavy lift, but we have been certainly, it's been a concerted effort to make sure that the corridor stays clean and that we don't run into that Queensville issue from the 80s where you would end up trying to develop a road through a particular neighborhood. So that is, again, that resolution is on your agenda tonight, and again, it's just a first step in a very long process, but wanted to go through some of this to let you know where we think this is headed.
Well, thank you, Jesse. I don't know if there's any comments from board members, but certainly we appreciate the work, and Powhite's been, as you point out and show us the history of it here, is great, because so I think there's a lot of misinformation out there that the county doesn't have a plan to build the Powhite extension, and of course there's been one on the books for a long time, and certainly the funding of that plan is going to be many layers, I think, before it's all said and done. But we really, really appreciate this presentation. I think it sheds a lot of light on this project. Thank you.